Well, this particular article is only one page, and it's a look at what might New Testament Christianity look like. And I suppose some people might object to trying to find out what New Testament Christianity looks like, because an alternative vision would be to have what you might call contemporary Christianity, a Christianity that is more aligned with the culture as we find it today. New Testament Christianity doesn't ignore contemporary issues, nor does it necessarily uh, ignore contemporary technology. But it says, in effect, what was always required of the church was to basically be in line with the requirements of the New Testament, such as they are. Because in truth, the New Testament says very little about church government and how churches should be run. So it's not exactly an extensive list of things. It's not like the Old Testament where there's very prescriptive rules. The New Testament seems almost to be the opposite. So the ingredients of New Testament Christianity as I saw them was essentially the primacy of the Bible. The Bible was the plumb line by which we judge everything. It looks like one of the key attributes of New Testament Christianity is personal holiness. And certainly I think whenever there have been attempts to return to New Testament Christianity, holiness has always been key attribute. There seems to be, and I could see some objecting to this, the concept of corporate eldership. I think on balance that is the right position, but I wouldn't necessarily hold that completely as being doctrinally correct, whereas the other two I definitely do think are correct. I just think on balance it is corporate leadership. There's also, I think, within New Testament Christianity, a minimal use of rituals, but there is definitely a sense in which the following sacraments are expected: the sacrament of baptism and the sacrament of the Lord's Supper. You could argue about head coverings as being a potential sacrament. And I think that's worth considering. Again, I would say that's an issue I wouldn't want to overemphasize, but certainly I would say New Testament Christianity would have to consider what role, if any, head coverings plays. New Testament Christianity with regard to worship. I think I would want it to be aware that the communion that we have as a church is a communion that extends over many generations. In other words, we shouldn't presume that the current state of worship is the only state of worship that we should employ within our congregational singing. And that wisdom would suggest having a repertoire that included the past as well as the present. Whether that's New Testament Christianity or just pragmatism, I don't know, but I kind of lumped it in with that. And New Testament Christianity seems to make worship in the congregation something that is open rather than being led from the front. That's really stems from the Corinthians, where everyone brings a psalm, brings a word, etc. This is hard to do because it does require a degree of maturity. And I do understand that if you're running evangelistic meetings or you're having meetings for young believers, that maybe open worship might not be appropriate. But for believers who are going on with God, I think open worship, where you don't get the service led from the front, would make sense because it seems to be the model that's being put forward by Paul in the Corinthian letter. And it's a model that, because it lacks structure, makes people have to depend upon God in the service, in the meeting. In other words, there's a certain sense in which we come with holy anticipation to hear what God's going to say. And we don't come with our agendas, but we come dependent upon God to speak and to move. And the Quakers were the ones who first started this. It was a bit more radical than what I was suggesting, but it's certainly the Brethren would have exercised it. And the early house churches in the 1960s would definitely have gone for that. But it is actually quite hard to maintain this. And it's quite easy for maybe open worship to become something that is as dead as anything else. So in one sense, I can see why people tend to steer away from it. However, if you're going for New Testament Christianity, I think you need to trust God that he will indeed come up and make himself known in the meetings through open corporate worship. Anyway, these are some thoughts about what it might be to live out New Testament Christianity. And they're not definitive, they're not exhaustive. They're merely starting points and discussion points. And I don't necessarily expect you or people to agree with them all, but I think they're worth considering. Well, thank you for listening.